you need to stick to the petrol stuff. And I was thinking, God, it's getting tougher for me to make anything that's emission compliant. And the performance figures that we're doing are so demanding in terms of heat and gearbox, and it just goes on and on. I'm kind of being pushed down this rabbit hole, but it makes sense, this rabbit hole.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. And greetings to all of you listening from places like the Bronx, New York, Birmingham, Alabama, Blackfoot, Idaho, Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, Recife, Brazil, and Limerick, Ireland. Thanks for joining me. And as always, if you enjoy the show, do me a favor and share it with your friends, because that's how this thing keeps growing week after week. Can't do it without you. And be sure to follow, rate, and review too, because that's also important out here in podcast land. All right, well, my guest today is Arash Farboud, who's been on the show before, and last time we talked about the supercars and hypercars he builds in England, but this time we're going to go far beyond cars. So this is going to be a very different episode. You know I like to talk about innovators and trailblazers in automotive history, but Arash is doing that right now. And he's very open about the challenges that he faces as a small manufacturer. Arash is a brilliant guy with, I think, a fascinating point of view. He also has very big plans for the next phase of his career. So we talked about all sorts of technology that's changing our world every day. For example, if I told you back in 2005 that a company called Amazon that sells books online will someday be putting people into orbit, you probably would have laughed. But Arash is looking to do that himself. Someday soon, his name will be on the side of a rocket. I think there are quite a few surprises in this episode, so stick with me because we're about to go inside the mind of Arash Farboud. And that's coming up right after this. This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. Maybe you can't afford that Shelby 289 Cobra or that Porsche 356 Speedster, but having a scale model on the shelf is easy with Model Citizen Diecast. They stock collector-grade scale models in 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, and even the massive 1/8th scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. And if you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout, they'll give you 10% off your order. Limitations apply. Just visit ModelCitizenDiecast.com and check out their great selection. From race cars to classic cars and everything in between. Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. And now my interview with Arash Farboud, right here on Horsepower Heritage. Arash Farboud, hey, how's it going, man?
Great, Maurice. Good to be back. We're back.
Yes, you're back. I had you on the show a while back, and we talked about Arash Cars, which is your supercar brand, and you've been building them for over 20 years now. Amazing, visceral, high-performance cars. And you've got some pretty exciting stuff happening right now. So I wanted to have you back on the show, talk about a few things. For example, the Arash AF10 hybrid hypercar is going on an American tour, right? Also, I'm excited to hear an update on the Arash Imperium all-electric hypercar, which is the equivalent of 1,000 horsepower. And you're moving ahead with space exploration ventures. So there's a lot to talk about, but why don't we start with the AF10? What's up with that?
Okay, so Peterson Museum want the car to come over, and we've hit a couple of hurdles, unfortunately. So the car was going to be shipped, but we couldn't ship it because they were saying it might get stuck in customs.
Right.
So it had to switch to air freight. So they said, we can't ship your car by container. It'll be sitting in customs for so long that it will literally melt because it's near seawater. It's a carbon chassis, all that galvanization issues. And they were shipping over so many cars from Europe as well. I think Porsche are bringing some cars. So we've been trying to manage this whole process. And only a couple of days ago, they rang me and said, we have another problem because the value of the car is quite high. There is an import duty tax we've got to pay. So we're still in the throes of it, of getting the car over, and they want to pick it up ASAP, but they're struggling with the whole next stage of importation. But if it goes through, then great. If it doesn't, it'll be such a tragedy. So we'll see. Unfortunately, some of these cars that they're bringing over are horrifically expensive. I mean, that's the lowest cost car coming over. There's some from the Porsche Museum, which are hundreds of millions of pounds. So they're not giving up. They do the best they can, and we hope to be in America soon. So coming to America.
Let's assume that the car makes it over. It'll be at the Peterson.
Yep, it's a hypercar exhibition. Starting that in November.
Wow, our timeline is really short then. Okay.
It's really short. They're under a lot of pressure. And, they're dealing with it. They're dealing with it. See what happens.
All right, well, so fingers crossed on the AF10. And then what's going on with the Imperium? You're going to build 75 of these cars, right?
Yeah, so it's in the final stages of mid-design refresh, we call it. So we've updated some of the frontal area and the rear, and then we're just finishing off the interior. The battery pack is so unbelievably hard to get right, and the safety protocol. So we're going to start off with a single motor and a 50 kilowatt hour battery pack. And we're hoping the KERS device goes on it as well. So that allows instant power on the track and regeneration. It's quite a cool thing. And then the rest of it is just literally composite work. So I'm just waiting for the designers. There's 7 designers at the moment, 7. They're doing pretty well, and then they'll do the visualization. So within the next 8 weeks, you'll see a complete refresh on our website. We start off with AFX, which is a 800 horsepower, 50 kilowatt hour, 800, 900 kilo car, carbon monocoque, and it's just got some wonderful, beautiful refreshes on it. So 75 units is the target. That's over a five-year period. But, the investors and buyers and agents are really pushing for the beta car, we call it. So the beta car is a volume car. And I've got to be careful that I don't burn myself out with the hypercars, because they are so unbelievably complex to do. So over the next 6 years, I think it's great. We'll have these masterpieces out there. But, I'm under pressure now to deliver something that everybody can have. There's not many, shall we say, hypercars out there by the bigger brands, because they are supported by the volume cars that the bigger brands are doing for a reason. It has to be commercially sensible. And I always look at, what Porsche did with the
959.
Yeah, the 959, exactly. And in order to survive, they needed governmental support, enough factory space, and they needed to create jobs, and they needed to make something that fitted into a market sector. So really the car that made the big difference was Butzi, Ferdinand's son, with the 901. And that's really what got the company going. They were kind of restricted by, the Beetle. It was the Beetle, let's face it. The father did the Beetle, didn't he? And he made a prettier looking Beetle. The Beetle was the people's car, Volkswagen. And then they separated away after the war. They had this sawmill, didn't they? A converted sawmill in Gmünd. And they started making a few cars. The 356 was the first one, which is simpler. And then Butzi moved, trying to divert the father into making a volume car that anybody could buy. But really, it was when Max Hoffman brought the car to America and wrote the logo on the handkerchief. That's the story I heard. And that was the game changer.
Yeah, for sure. Max Hoffman was instrumental in the rise of so many marques in the United States. He saw the market potential here. So Porsche, BMW, Mercedes-Benz. Yeah, amazing guy. And sort of a kind of an inscrutable character, as I understand it. There's not a lot we know about Max Hoffman.
There isn't. He's not celebrated enough. He should be, really. He was the game changer.
Right. In the sense that, Luigi Chinetti was celebrated as the Ferrari importer, right?
Oh, right.
And other characters like John von Neumann, who was a West Coast Porsche distributor and dealer. So you're going to start with AFX, about 800 horsepower, give or take. And then you said that the battery pack was enormously complex. Give us a sense of what you mean there. Are you talking about locating it in the car, getting it low enough, making space for it?
The challenge is assembling the cells, wire bonding them, putting them into an encasing, putting the battery management system on there, fireproofing it all, charger.
And in case people don't know, Imperium is an all-electric hypercar. I've heard various horsepower figures quoted. I've heard 1,000. I've heard 1,200. Obviously, you're going to have different versions, and it all depends on the number of motors.
Yeah, that's basically it. So each motor is capable peak power of 650 kilowatts. depending on voltage. So if your voltage is 800 volts, it can do it. If you're at 400 volts, then it's a little bit less. So your battery pack is basically organized into what volts you need, and you have a trade-off effect on what your capacity is, basically. The type of cell you use is either a pouch or cylindrical, depending on what our expectation is. So at the moment, it makes more sense to do a cylindrical one because it's safer. So we learned a lot from Tesla. We had to. But you look at the Porsche Taycan, they've got a prismatic box type cell. And that's a little bit easier for us to assemble with. But we're trying to go down the cylindrical cell. It's a little bit more energy rich.
So I'm going to take a guess here and say the prismatic box, in terms of economy of space, that makes more sense. But the cylindrical arrangement allows it's safer because less opportunity for leakage. Is that?
That's correct. And also, each one of the cells has got its own armor around it, and also the distribution of power to the anode and cathode seems to be more manageable in terms of safety, because they have an individual fuse through the wire bonding process. The prismatic batteries are very good and they're easier to assemble, but they don't seem to have as much energy content. So for a sports car, it's a little bit of a trade-off. The challenge really for us is the unbelievably expensive development costs for all of this. The amount of effort that we're having to put in and the amount of investment to get all this right is really tough for a tiny outfit like us. It is gigantuan. And if you look at our nearest sort of aspirational cars like the Lotus Evija and the Rimac, these guys have got hundreds of millions of pounds of budget behind them. So my challenge is so enormous. Also, in terms of what we're doing, we're presenting a concept to our market set to see what they think. And so far, the response has been very good. The leading response has been coming from America. We've learned a lot in the last two weeks of what really we have to be doing and what challenges we have ahead of ourselves. And the political landscape as well is getting tougher. So England is becoming a very tough place to develop, to manufacture and sell. So the target markets are starting becoming more prolific in America. The next thing that we're experiencing is the shipping costs and customs importing taxes all over the place. So energy is starting to affect us at every level possible. And then the workforce is starting to become a problem. So the whole nature of the automobile and its validity is starting to become under a lot of threat. So it's trying to think vertically as an entrepreneur is our biggest challenge. How do we get to where we want to be as a company? We are a 21-year-old company, 21 years old. That's unusual in the car world, car industry, for me to keep it going, to keep it gassed.
Listen, this sort of reflection is so important, right? How can you do it otherwise?
You can't. You have to just get feedback from people.
Yeah.
You get as much feedback as you possibly can, but it really is the customer's experience that is the most valid.
Of course.
What is it going to do for the customer? What do they really want out of this? And what is it that they're going to need to justify it for the future? And, I was speaking to a couple of my Italian suppliers, and they were saying, look, Arash, nobody wants an electric car. The only people that are going to buy them are people in California. And I was going, I'm not sure if you're right on that one. And he was saying, no, you need to stick to the petrol stuff. And I was saying, God, it's getting tougher for me to make anything that's emission compliant. And the performance figures that we're doing are so demanding in terms of heat and gearbox, and it just goes on and on. And then the whole restriction on the emissions, I'm kind of being pushed down this rabbit hole, but it makes sense, this rabbit hole. This is kind of where the market's going anyway. The environment's going this way. I think we're at a point of no return. And I'm speaking this way as a petrol head guy. I'm in the middle of this industrial revolution as the guy that was making the best steam engines and love steam engines, being told you really should be looking at petrol. And I was thinking, well, everyone wants a steam engine with the clicky, fasty movie thing, or they want the bigger wheels, the big metal ones, the small rubber band, and everyone's going, well, you really should be looking at petrol because they've got like big rubber tires on them now, so the suspension is really good, and they've got a petrol engine that takes you for a long way and it goes really fast. And hey, it makes a nice noise, not this noise. So I'm in the middle of that stage of going from petrol to no sound and only one moving part. With a single motor, it's just one moving part.
Arash, W.O. Bentley, as a young man prior to establishing his car company, was an apprentice in the locomotive shops for, I think, a year or two. And that's where he learned a lot of mechanical stuff. And if you look at one of his cars, one of the Cricklewood Bentleys, you can see where he maybe took some inspiration from steam locomotives.
Right.
They're so overbuilt and stout and,
Yeah. So was it from Cricklewood in London?
Yeah. That's where Bentley's first factory was, in Cricklewood. So he was always chasing funding, right?
Yeah, exactly. We need fuel.
And that's where the Bentley boys came in. The Bentley boys were his affluent, young sportsmen friends who they threw money at the company. They wanted to go racing at Le Mans. And so eventually, when that all kind of dried up, the company went into receivership, and there was one bidder, and that one bidder was confidential. He didn't know who it was. And he went to the meeting where they were going to decide the fate of the company. And he discovered that one bidder was Rolls-Royce.
No way.
Yeah. His arch rivals. And they got control of Bentley, and they got control of W.O. Bentley himself. He was considered an asset of the corporation. And so for 5 years, they kept him employed, but he wasn't really allowed to do a whole lot. They finally allowed him to road test the cars and provide notes to the engineers, but they pretty much kept him on a short leash. And really, they wanted the company for the 8-liter motor, which they got, of course. Very interesting. So, Arash, I'm interested in some of your insights, maybe as a small manufacturer, how you see the world, because your point of view is obviously very different from a large manufacturer. And maybe you can just give us some insights.
It is a David and Goliath.
Yeah.
I remember I sat down with Jim Glickenhaus. I saw him at Goodwood. We hung out together. Jim came over to see me because we had a coffee stand pretty much in our pit. Because we know that some days we're going to have to work through the night to repair the car. People don't see it because we're a small outfit. Everybody, when everybody goes home at Goodwood, there's a team of people working on cars. No one sees that. Lotus are changing tires. The Rimac guys got their laptops, and Jim Glickenhaus is there. And Jim sat with me, with his big cowboy hat, and he's like, Arash, this. He always says, "This is the deal. This is where it's going." I always say to him, "Can we work together?" I've known him for so long, and we're just trying to work out what needs to be done to survive. I said, "Look, I need a big brother to survive." I think Enzo Ferrari and his son had the same discussion when they were trying to survive. You need a big, powerful force behind you to get through that complex development cycle that no one really appreciates. And the war between Ford and Ferrari. Ferrari was spending so much money on development, and that's what made a Ferrari. And Ford didn't quite get that because that's not in their culture. And you saw the arguments going on. And I think the Italians just got very worried that they were going to lose their treasure. Although it was nonsensical to most people, Fiat had to come in. Otherwise, Ferrari would be finished, really.
That's right.
You hear the stories about waiting in reception, and Enzo would not allow the heat to be turned on because he couldn't afford it. All he needed was his cars to run in and race. I felt his pain. I feel when I meet another car company owner, I don't need to say much. I look in their eyes and I can see what they're up against. It's an insanity that you have to just get through. And Jim Glickenhaus pretty much won Le Mans, let's face it. As far as I'm concerned, he won Le Mans. He had, Team Yost running his cars, which is, the stars aligned for him this year, properly aligned for him. And, the only time I've ever remembered cars, 707 and 709, I don't remember car numbers.
I was glued to Le Mans.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely glued. I had to get up early the next day, so I couldn't stay up all night, but I left the television on all night in case if I got up to get a glass of water it was fantastic.
Yeah, that was nice. Le Mans was good. If there's an electric car series allowance, then that's my only chance of getting into Le Mans, I'd say.
I was going to ask you about that because, I know you're climbing a tremendously steep mountain with the Imperium, right?
It's huge.
And I know you're going to do it. You're going to make the summit, but Le Mans is yet another mountain, right?
Huge. massive.
So what are your thoughts on giving it a go?
The thing with a car that drives in Le Mans, you have some basic principles you've got to get right, which is when things get damaged, the suspension needs to be a quick swap. Your crash box and crash capability has to be correct. So if you swap out the, their motor is a Pipo motor. Pipo, I think, is a French company, French Le Mans car engine and their sequential gearbox. So if you swap out the Pipo motor and the fuel tank and put an electric motor and a quick swap fuel tank or battery pack, you're in, because you can't change other variables. So the driver packaging, the electronics, the steering, the wheel hubs, brakes, front crash box, rear crash box, telemetrics, all of that, you don't want to change that variable. The only variable you want to change is the battery pack for the fuel tank and the electric motor for the petrol engine. So I would say it wouldn't take too much effort to do a switcheroonie on the motor and the battery, and we would need some kind of proper money funding to not skimp on it. And we'd be okay. You can do Garage 65. Run it out of Garage 65, which is their prototype testing new equipment thing. Get a proper team. And I wouldn't get involved in anything other than I would coordinate all the right people. You got the best teams, the best engineering. You got the established scenario. And the only difference would be the pit stop. So we would aim to do a quick battery swap every certain number of laps. And I would say year one, of course, don't expect to win. Even if you're in an LMP1 or Hypercar Class, just do as many laps as you can, because the following year it's going to get better.
Go as long as you can.
Go as long as you can, but you'd work it out by you'd have to do Sebring and a lot of testing beforehand. But, let's say you were having success at Sebring and your 24-hour testing that was going on was very successful. How would that affect the overall landscape of sports car racing? What does that mean? Is that what the public want? They want to hear engines, don't they? They want to hear noise and drama. Although the LMP1 cars and diesel were silent.
Right.
Those Audis were silent, weren't they?
They were.
It was terrifying when you go to the moment. I was standing by the bike. I was standing by the side just going, did you just see that? It's silent.
Well, and for that matter, Formula One is the same. I mean,
yeah, it's quiet now.
It's quiet. You feel quite removed. It's not as visceral. Being at the circuit, watching a Formula One race, this is sort of like a video game. And that's not to take away anything from the sport. It's an amazing sport. The drivers are incredible. The teams, it's high drama, but
no, it's not the same as it used to be. And it's quite, it's difficult to watch because you have no idea what's going on. You're stuck in a seat. You can't really, you kind of said to yourself, well, I spent all this money on this ticket. I need to be here. I need to watch it. I've got no idea what's going on. No one else around me knows what's going on. The TV screen's miles away. It's just, Le Mans is clever. They put the numbers system with the dots. 3 dots is your third, second dot, 2 dots is your second. It just helps for that experience. But everyone's trying to get to the next race in Formula One. It is a challenge to get that. I think the Drive to Survive series behind the scenes is what's saving Formula One.
I agree. It's a new legion of fans.
It is.
Because it's making it human again.
Yes.
If you look at a driver in a present day Formula One car, it might as well be an android behind the wheel. You're so detached as a person in the stands. You don't see their face. They're behind the halo. They're down deep in the cockpit. Cars are very quiet. To me, it's a little bit anodyne.
It's moving that direction. Yeah. And trying to work out how I can make it better. You can't.
Don't get me wrong. I still enjoy it. I love it. I love racing. But this is why I gravitate toward vintage racing.
Yeah.
Because it's so accessible and it's so mechanical. It's alive.
Yeah. And you're seeing that era of Fangio racing or, Damon Hill racing or Gilles Villeneuve racing. And you appreciate how unbelievably dangerous it was.
Yes. Now, the pitfall here as a fan is if I'm not careful, I'm not in the moment and appreciating what's going on right now, whether it's Formula One or IndyCar or what have you, Le Mans. I don't want to miss the present in my celebration of the past or in my fascination with the past. I'm being very philosophical here, but
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's why Drive to Survive has made it more understandable and human. Like, Ozzy Osbourne, Meet the Osbournes, made understanding of people's more human, and it just spurred something on. I think that's what people want to see. They want to see what's really going on. Let's think about it. We don't really know the history of Ferrari very well. We don't really know the history of Apple very well. There's not much footage on Steve Jobs, let's face it. And, I've studied every video of Steve Jobs and Elon and all these greats. It's tough to work out what's going on. And, they don't want you to know in that time because they were running a competitive advantage at that point. And it's the same for Formula One. So Drive to Survive is last year's. What they're filming now will be for next year because they can't because of all the secrecy.
Right.
So you have to kind of remember what's going on last year and all that drama from last year to what's going on this year. And I think, as you say, you're not seeing these guys in cars so easily now. So what's it all about?
Yeah.
And that concerns me. What's it all about, the racing? It's great fun, but there's got to be something more.
Well, you sort of asked the question in terms of electric racing cars, to what end? And I think that's very valuable to consider because what has racing ever been but a technology demonstrator, an improvement of the engineering and manufacturing so that they can build better road cars. There's no other point to go racing, at least from a factory standpoint, right? Racing makes your cars better, provides you more street credit for the eventual buyer that comes into a showroom.
Yes. Race on Sunday, sell on Monday.
Yep. And so with EVs, where invariably there's going to be more and more standardization, right? I mean, we just talked about that prismatic battery versus cylindrical battery. Those are two choices. Or let's talk about V12, straight 8, flat 6. I mean,
yeah, you've got so many choices there.
Right. I
don't know. As I said, we're working on the KERS system on our car. So the battery and the motor are now kind of understood, although it's immensely hard to do it right. And the safety is paramount. So we're working on the next things, which is how do you make that battery go a lot longer and adding cool stuff so that the KERS system we've got is pretty impressive. And it's got a bit of drama to it as well, which is nice.
Arash, that's basically an afterburner for an EV, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's an afterburner. Exactly. It's a good way of putting it. So we tried ultra capacitors, but we couldn't get it to work. It was just taking up so much space. Ultra capacitor is basically using static electricity for a short period of time between two plates, and you use that energy for the push, the acceleration bit. And then you've got your lithium batteries or your ionic jelly roll batteries, which is a slower burn. You try and pull lots of electrons across a membrane, they get hot. It's friction. So that's the challenge with batteries. You can't draw them too quick because it causes heat. It's friction, it's chemical reaction. Elon's done a better job with his new 7046, I can't remember the size of it. The fatter battery, multiple layers of anode and cathode, so it's all slits. So the electrons are flowing a lot easier between the membranes to the top and the bottom, the anode and the cathode. That's really smart. He's gone back to first principles, as he always has done, and worked out a better way of getting the batteries to work. And we're having to learn as much as we can from first principles of chemistry on how to do this, as much as the fuel companies are working on how to make the best octane fuel. And the engine companies are trying to work out how to make that piston go up and down faster to create more power and adding turbos. That psychology for me is gone. I'm on electromotive forces and electron chemistry. I mean, I'm having to go back to studying gravity and space-time fabric.
Let me ask you a dumb question about getting power to an electric motor in an EV.
Yeah.
So if we think of electricity flowing as water does, right?
Yeah.
The bigger the pipe you have, the more water you can flow through it.
Yeah.
As the pipe gets smaller, there's more friction. There's, you can't flow as efficiently, right? So how do you actually get the electrons from the batteries to the electric motor?
So in order to get power, for an electric motor, you need volts, which is like the speed of the water through the pipe. Amps is the amount of water going through the pipe. So if you've got less power, you're going to have your demand to the motor is going to be more water. So that makes the pipe bigger, so thicker cables. So if you're running low voltage, so 48 volts, in order to achieve the power you want, if it's a high power amount, you're going to have big, thick wires. If you've got a high voltage system, you've got lots of speed. So the speed of the electrons is volts, and then you can run a lighter cabling to a more capable motor. A motor is basically it's running Fleming's law.
Let me provide an analogy. We can think of an electric motor spinning as the electrons flow to it as a water wheel.
Yes, it is like a water wheel. You got it. So in order for an AC motor, you've got to switch it. It's like slapping a bicycle wheel with a stick. So that's switching. So you've got to tell the motor in segment which way to go through an EMF,
electromagnetic field.
Right. So electromagnetic, you've got to keep flicking the wheel, and that's switching. And that's the inverter. When you get to a certain speed, you get something called back EMF. So it all gets confusing. The challenge we've got today is if you want high volts to achieve the power for performance for a car, you've got to use switches that can cope with that voltage. So that's the challenge today, is to get that voltage capable switch, which is made out of silicon carbide. It can cope with the power, and that manufacturing process is quite strained at the moment. Getting these switches is quite difficult. It's really only for motorsport. You look at a Tesla, they're using standard amp switches in series, which is really clever. They solve their problem by using off-the-shelf bits, a bit like Apple does. And as a small manufacturer like ourselves, we're having to work within certain parameters, but we're lucky enough for the Imperium AFX to only need to use smaller volumes of components, so it's okay. But once you start to go to bigger volumes, then the exotic material starts becoming a problem. Tesla have got it right because they're using a standardized componentry list, and their customers don't need their cars to go 1 million miles an hour. I mean, they're fast.
Right. I mean, they just released the Plaid, so.
I mean, the Plaid is insanely fast. It's so fast. I mean, I've not driven the Plaid, but I don't think it's available in the United Kingdom. But it's not what's necessary for taking you to A to B, really.
I think it's 1.9 seconds, 0 to 60.
Yeah, it's really fast. It's so insanely fast. Nothing will compete with that. And then the Roadster is running 3 motors as well.
Tesla Plaid, 1.98 seconds, 0 to 60.
Yeah, you can't. That's no petrol engine keep up with that. No way.
It's not possible. Not possible.
Not with that torque player. Yeah, you can't do it. It's not possible. You're moving from steam engine to petrol engine.
Yeah.
So is it necessary for Tesla to do it? Yes, because they can. It's just literally another motor bolting on the other side of their diff, and the inverter is integrated. And they're probably using Model 3 tech, which is very, very elegant. Yeah, you can't compete with that. Elon knows that.
Yeah.
He knows that. It's not necessary for their market as well. Their clients, they don't need to do that performance, but they're doing it to prove that no petrol engine can compete with that. They've ticked that box. I get it.
Well, it's the same reason that Elon built a flamethrower.
Yeah, that's brilliant. From Spaceballs.
Plaid.
Yeah, it's all.
I love it. Well, you know about the model names, right? You know about S, 3, X, and Y.
It's all to do with sexy, wasn't it? To make electric cars sexy.
Sexy, yeah. I just love that he's trolling everyone on that.
Yeah, he is.
It's great.
So he can't call the Model 3 an E. I don't think.
Because Ford, right? Because Ford has it already. So
I think something to do with Ford. I think he talks about it at some point. Because the thing is, for me, in order to understand electric cars during my petrol hybrid point, I had to study everything about every electric car out there. Mm-hmm. So I had to watch all these movies and videos, because my whole life is based on movies. Learning from movies. What's the future? Well, watch Space Odyssey 2001 and blow your mind.
Hey, listen, let's talk about space exploration. I think we need to start talking about this by tell us about your former next door neighbor.
Yeah. I had Professor Stephen Hawkins, the great physicist. We'd always go and see him, do the neighbors meeting. You'd have to turn up and try not to be starstruck, and sit there and he'd talk. Eventually on his machine, you hear the beeping.
Eventually,
it would be eventually.
Yeah, sure.
He'd say like, and you'd hear his beeping. It'd be like beep, 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 and that was his heart. He'd listen in. In the early days, he didn't have any of that. You'd always see him, driving around, and I always say hello. I'd always have a conversation with him. Always stop and like, all right, Prof, you okay? How's it going? You'd have to talk at him, not his nurses. Say, all right, how's it going? Hope you're well. What do you think of my new car? I always say, what do you think of my new car? Always love cars. Yeah, always loved cars. And he was a comedian. He's a comedian. Every time you speak to him, or you did a presentation, or we saw him, he just cracking jokes. He led life through comedy, and he explained things so that anybody could understand it. That was his thing. And he always say, stop looking at the ground, look in the sky. I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I want to pay for my next Porsche. He says, the wonder is in the sky. I'm like, really? I'm not sure. Every time I look in the sky, it just looks pretty scary to me. It's all dark and a few stars. What are they? What's a star? He'd explain particle physics. I'd go to lots of his events, and he'd always be at the curry house with me. There's a great famous curry house near me. You turn up, he'd be there.
Wow.
He watched all the cool movies. I saw him. I remember when Terminator 2 came out, he'd be at the cinema with his team.
He's a regular guy. Well, not a regular guy, but we all have, he's a human being.
Yeah, he was just a normal guy that just wanted to live life, and he was a comedian. That's how I remember him. He used to have fireworks. It's so funny. Massive fireworks in the street, bonkers fireworks. He'd invite you over, go and see him, fireworks everywhere. All the neighbours would come out there. Steve sat out the fireworks again. It must be his birthday, new book, new movie, something like that. We'd take it for granted. You wouldn't do it in a normal street, but these were enormous fireworks that used to go off in his garden, in his front garden. And we'd all turn up and say hello. It was the book that made him what he needed to be. He needed to do the book. He needed to make money to look after his kids, his wife, his life.
Yeah.
He made a book. It's an awesome book. Most people don't get past page 1. So he's explaining space-time fabric, and it's like, I get that. That's what Einstein, the last years of his life, the last 40 years, he was chasing eclipses to show the bend of light, which defines it, the theory of relativity. And most people don't know that about Einstein. He defined the theory of relativity through the movement of light across a large mass. And that's really critical to understand for space travel.
Absolutely.
It's what is gravity. It's not Newton's law.
By the way, Stephen Hawking, if no one knew that he was really a comedian, I mean, the first clue is his book title, right? A Brief History of Time.
Yeah. I never thought of that. Yeah, it's a brief history of time. He's right. Time is, that's a good point. I never thought of that. He was a comedian. You go into his sitting room and he had a huge cutout of Marilyn Monroe.
Really?
Yeah. And he had all his Simpsons episodes he was appearing in picture frames.
I love it.
He's been in all these cool things. And, I always say to my other friends, I bet Steve says he lives next to the car guy.
Yeah, probably.
Because me and my brother almost run him over about 100 times going home. So he used to just drive his wheelchair in the middle of the road because it's Steve, right? I don't care. So we'd turn around the corner. Oh my God! Slow down. And so then he started putting lights on his wheelchair so we could see him. It's like going, oh my God, he's in the road, because it's a corner where we live.
In any way, did your relationship with Stephen Hawking, being his neighbor, make you think about, hey, maybe I can do some space exploration ventures in the future?
No, never. It's car guy. And it's really weird because I've opened the book. I was saying to my dad, I was like, I had to open the book up again. And, I'm a dyslexic. So I had to buy the Audible. So I'm going to have to listen to the Audible to explain it to me. So I'm opening it up now and I'm going, oh my God, all of this stuff makes so much sense. All the explanations, because I studied Einstein 2 years ago on his theories, and they all make sense now. It's like, of course, so if you think about these stars in our galaxy, they're suns. They have a solar system going around them. but they're so far away. The light you're seeing may not be there
Right.
in real time. And if
Right.
if you had an Earth at that sun point, the star, what they're seeing is the dinosaurs.
Right. No matter where you are in the universe, if you look up into the sky, some of what you're seeing is artifact.
Yes, that's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is fascinating stuff. But at a certain point, you've started to think about the industry required for space exploration and the many, many disciplines. It's going to be untold numbers of suppliers and subcontractors. You're trying to find a way to fit into that.
Yeah. So my next 20 years is going to be about doing something really useful. So I've ticked the box of making sports cars. Obviously, I've been working in the medical industry and helped the masses in terms of healthcare. And that chapter is finished now.
By the way, we should probably note that you supplied medical kits for all sorts of procedures in hospitals. So surgical kits, IV infusion kits, that kind of thing.
Heart bypass, hair grafts, breast augmentation. We did it all. So I'm now at this crossroads where my petrol chapter has finished. So we're moving into the new world of different technologies. So everything I've been planning and working on for the last 4 years is now in a state of you have to do something about it. Because I'm always 3 years ahead. So my 3 years ago predictions are now here. So with that knowledge and confidence of what I've done in predictions for the last 10 years, I need to start actioning what I predict in the next 5 years. One of the things I was discussing with my dad today, I phoned him up and we were talking about 3D printing. I was speaking to another guy who sells beef. I said, we were talking about 3D printing meat. And I was saying, look, in order for us to survive on the moon, there's going to be a requirement to feed the best thing. And also we're seeing with climate change and electric cars now that the movement to do better is happening. So I was saying to my dad, in the next 20 years, I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to ban meat that's come from a living animal.
Oh, it's coming. Absolutely, that's coming. And by the way, the first step is to make it so expensive for average people that sales drop. They remove it from the marketplace by making it so exclusive that nobody buys it anymore, except the very wealthy.
Oh, yeah, I think it's going to be like smoking.
Oh, you think they're going to go after sort of a moral argument versus
Totally. Yeah.
Well, I think that's another prong in the. I think that's happening too, for sure.
The thing is, when we were kids, we just ate our food. We didn't know where it came from.
99% of us are very far removed from the origins of our food. That's for sure.
It really is. So I'm predicting. So I was speaking to the beef guys. Like, look, I'm an expert at 3D printing. I said, look, this is your big break. You need to look at 3D printing meat. Use a plant-based system and 3D print a meat with a fat in it. And fat comes in different types of form. You can have what is fat? Fat is a
soluble lipid, right?
Thank you, lipid. It's a solid lipid. So you can make your lipids in other ways naturally. So fat is what gives the flavor, and then the protein gives the texture. And I said, look, I can print it so it looks amazing. And he was going, I don't get it. I was like, I reckon it would be amazing to have a series of 3D printers in your McDonald's chain or your In-N-Outs so people can see the food being printed. That's so cool. Before it goes into the fryer, you add your tomato and your mayonnaise and your lettuce and your onions and the bread top and bottom, and it comes out super perfect. So he's at a beef conference at the moment. So he came over to see me last week. He loves racing cars. He's got a Ginetta, and I met him at Goodwood. And I was like, man, this is your time. You're 30 years old. It's going to change, man. And he's like, yeah, we're talking about it now. I said, look at printing. So I was thinking, God, what am I going to do? Should I phone up MakerBot? And every time I phone them, like, Arash, God, what's this next wacky idea you've got? Oh no, here we go. So I'm going to phone them up. I'll speak to their top people and say, look, I want to print meat. Let's do something. And I know what they're going to say. We can't do that. It needs a budget. These development. I'm just going to phone them and say, look, let's do it together. Let's develop, because they want their products, their machines used on a desktop for everybody to use. And that's a tough thing, because you might want to use a 3D printer, but what are you going to use it for? If you're in the car industry, Yes. And, 3D printing, there's certain technologies I'm really fascinated with. In my opinion, quantum computing is not fast enough. And if you think about quantum computing, they have to be kept at very low temperatures to work. So I think, we've got ARM, the company ARM, it was from Cambridge. You must watch the movie Micro Men, explains it all. Chris Curry, Herman Hauser, Sir Clive Sinclair. Sir Clive Sinclair was Cambridge. I used to see him all the time. All these amazing people. It's called the Cambridge phenomenon, all these amazing people. But anyway, I'm not losing track there. But the speed of computing power is not fast enough. And Herman did ARM, which is Acorn RISC machines. They changed it to advanced RISC machines. They got rid of the Acorn bit. And it was all based on that BBC microcomputer, which was made by Chris Curry and Herman. And it was this fight between Sinclair and the BBC Micro. Sinclair computers were actually the best gaming computers. ARM became the chip makers for all your mobile phones. So all your mobile phones has an ARM chip in it. It's the best operating system. It's made out of a small building in Cambridge. So I was thinking, well, what's Elon got a problem with at the moment? His autopilot's just not good enough. And I know why. And okay, he's doing his robot. It's the processing that's required is, in my opinion, just too slow. So I was looking at all the movies that discuss processing power, because we've been looking at autonomous vehicles. We can't get into it. We speak to ARM. They're like, well, we've got problems to solve this. And we can't deal with you because you're too small. And I speak to the executives every now and again because they're dads at the school. Hello, where do you work? Oh, I work for ARM. I'm thinking about doing this. You get good conversations going. So I'm seeing all these technologies that are starting to all become an ecosystem. They're all converging. So no matter who I speak to, they have a fascination in each of these industries, but they're all restricted by money and customers, fuel and demand. So I'm getting more and more fascinated. Where are the sort of bottlenecks in what people need? And it's all converging into actually the survival of the human race. And the survival of the human race is, as Elon says, you've got to use the sun. It's free, shows up every day. It's what should be powering everything rather than using Dynaco from the Cars movie, oil. I can see what's going on with Origin Blue and SpaceX. I can see where all the funding is going now for the survival of the human race. And I now see the next bottleneck, which is labor and knowledge. It's not money. Once you know how to generate the cash flow, that's not where the bottleneck is. It's knowledge, solving problems, and labor. Labor's a massive problem now. Getting people to go to work and have a desire. And, the biggest problem is, what's the point of having a supercar company? But I don't mind doing big things. So thinking big makes more sense. Listening to all the Steve Jobs videos. So my mind's been sort of enlightenment of where I should be going instead of messing around with a small fry. We should be focusing on the current major issues that's going on in the world, which is clearly climate control and food and labor, which is robots. So Elon's doing the right thing with the Tesla robot. Computing power is not fast enough. And then currency, as we've seen with COVID, they just print money. That's not going to solve a lot of problems. So I've been fascinated with all these three things, and they're kind of converging together. And I was thinking, you know what? For the next 20, 30 years of my life, I might as well do something that's really big. It's Star Wars. It's exploration. It's colonization of the moon. We've not colonized the moon. That's insane. You can imagine if we do have a problem. Elon talks about it. He's 50 years ahead of me because he sold his company at such a young age with a huge amount of power and wealth. If we don't solve these problems, he's right. If we have a total annihilation, we're back to cavemen.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Arash, is that because we have the technology and ability to do this, it makes it imperative that we do it. There's no other choice but to colonize the moon.
We've got to get on. We've got to get on with it. We don't need a war. We need a reason. And that was the war was a reason, bad reason, but it pulled people together. It gave governments focus. It gave people a boost to do something for a reason.
How do we crystallize your plans for space exploration? Do you see a specific technological direction for you?
Okay, today's snapshot. What I've got to do is try and persuade my American investors and customers to look at manufacturing onshore. That's step one. I'm in the same conversation. I'm saying, look at, is there a launch pad capable in Florida? Because I don't think I could launch rockets from England.
There's all sorts of, you need to be as close to the equator as possible.
I think we're going to try and get the manufacturing where the consumer is and just take a real go at space and spend the next 20 years doing really, really great things.
Well, Arash, you're a fascinating guy. You've made me think about the world in a different way many times. The stuff that you're doing, you're so fearless. I love that. It goes without saying that you're an incredibly bright man, but a lot of smart people, fear gets in their way.
Yeah, people need to know that I'm wacky, but they also need to get on that wacky train.
This episode actually is quite a departure from what I normally talk about, but I think people are really going to enjoy this one. And by the way, there's a link in the show notes, but you can find out more at arashcars.com. That's ARASH cars.com.
Thanks a lot, Maurice. I'm really grateful for what you're doing.
All right, my friend. Great having you on again. Arash Farboud, thanks for being my guest, and we'll see you next time. That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, don't forget to follow the podcast, tell your friends about it, and leave me 5 stars and a quick review. buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage if you want to support the show that way. Always appreciate it. Read articles and watch videos at horsepowerheritage.com. The Instagram is what else but @HorsepowerHeritage. And until next time, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.